Hello everyone! In today's video, I have a tutorial for you. We're going to be making our own belt. I've received several requests for this tutorial and today is the day. Here are a few photos of belts I've made in the past to match my garments, and I think a matching belt really does elevate the look of any garment, any dress, skirt, pants. A matching belt really does kick it up a notch. So this is a beginner project. So if you have basic sewing skills, you should be able to follow along to finish the belt. Now, if you are a member of my private email community, you should be ready to go with all of your supplies because I did send out the email with links to everything I will be using in today's tutorial. So let's just jump right in. Before we get started, I want to alert you that you may hear some background noise in some parts of the video. On one of the days that I was recording, it was very windy outside and the windows in my studio were rattling. There was nothing I could do about it because I wanted to continue the tutorial and get this out for you. But in editing, I have tried to cancel out as much of the noise as possible. So just want to let you know if you hear rattling, it was the wind. Okay, let's get into it. First, I want to show you the supplies that we're going to be using to create the pattern for the belt. We're going to need tracing paper, and we'll use this to draw the lines based on the measurements that we're going to take on our own individual bodies. We're going to need a tape measure to measure the width of our body where we want the belt to sit. You're going to need paper, scissors. Don't use your dressmaking shears to cut the paper. Make sure that you're using a separate pair of shears. And then you may use the seam gauge during the pattern making, and you'll definitely use it while we're sewing the belt together. You're going to need a marking tool, whether it's a marker, a pen, or a pencil. And then you can use some type of weight or whatever you have around the house to weight down your paper onto your cutting area so that it doesn't roll up while we're working with it. Also, for making the pattern, we're going to need rulers, and I wanted to talk about that separately because there are several different options. Whatever you already have, use it. So the L square is very helpful for squaring off your lines, for getting perfect lines. You will see when we start making the pattern, I'm going to start with the raw edge of the tracing paper, and I'm going to use this to square the horizontal line that is perpendicular to the edge of that paper. So this is very helpful for that. But if you don't have that, it's okay. You can also use your yardstick, and you will also see me use this to measure the length because my L square isn't long enough for the measurement that I'm going to take for my body. So I will be using the yardstick to extend the line to the length that I want. If you have a rotary cutter and a cutting mat, then you can use your rotary or your lip ruler, your lip edge ruler to draw or to cut your pattern, and also to draw the lines on the pattern. If all you have is a clear ruler that measures 18 inches, you can use this also. You can start, draw your line as long as it will go, and then move your ruler down to continue that line. So again, use whatever you have, but these are some of the options of rulers that you can use to make your pattern. Now we're going to take a look at the fabrics that we're going to be using. First, you will need your fashion fabric, and I'm using a medium weight denim fabric that I've had for a very long time, and I'm making the belt to match a dress that I'm planning to make in the future. If you're using lightweight, medium weight, or heavyweight fabric, it doesn't matter. We're going to use the same techniques. However, if you're using a very thick, heavyweight fabric, you may need to make adjustments to the width of your belt when we are planning in order to wrap it around your belt buckle. And I'll discuss that with you when I show you the buckles. You're also going to need a belt backing. And the belt backing is what's going to give the belt its thickness. So I will be using this faux leather, and you can see it's very thick. When I crunch it up, it just comes right back. So you want to use something that's pretty thick and stiff for your belt backing. You can use any type of thick upholstery fabric or just anything that's thick that's going to give it the weight. Now, if you don't want a stiff, thick belt, you can always use your fashion fabric as your backing fabric also. You would just cut 2 strips for the belt, or from the pattern that we're going to create. You can cut 2 strips, one for the front and one for the backing. Now, we're also going to use interfacing, and I'm using Craft Fuse 808 by Pellon. This is the interfacing that I use for all of my belts, and we interface the fabric, the fashion fabric, to stiffen it up a little bit. Now, if you are using your fashion fabric as your belt front and your backing, you can choose to interface just the front, or you can interface the front and the backing. So both pieces of fabric to give you a bit more thickness. Okay, so remember, you get to decide, and I do recommend just testing it out. You can test it on a scrap piece of your fashion fabric with the backing, with one piece interfaced, or you can test it with the fashion fabric as your front and your backing, interfacing either one or both pieces. Okay, now we're going to take a look at belt buckles and a couple of other tools that we're going to use to make the belt. And I'm going to share 3 different options for you in terms of choosing a belt buckle. So first, you can purchase new belt buckles, and I have 2 examples here. So this one on the left is by Sewology, and I picked it up from my local Hobby Lobby. And this is a 1.5-inch belt buckle. So what that means is when you're planning the width of your belt, you want to make sure that it's no larger than 1.5 inches. And the bar across the belt is about 1/8 of an inch larger than the 1.5 inch measurement. And that's to make sure that you have a little bit of clearance on each side of the bar. You don't want to make your belt too wide to where it's rubbing up against the bar, or too narrow where too much of that bar is showing. And then the belt by Dritz I picked up from my local Joann's, and this one is 1 5/8 of an inch. So you will make your belt 1 5/8 of an inch wide, and then you'll have 1/8 of an inch clearance so that it will fit inside of there. But you will measure that. You will measure your belt when you press it and fold it out. I'll demonstrate all of that and see if it fits inside of there before we sew it down. Okay? Now, you can also go to your local thrift store and pick up belts and remove the belt to keep the buckle. I do this all the time. I go to my local thrift store and I pick up the ugly belts that have decent buckles and I bring them home. And then I just cut away the belt to keep the buckle. I like this one because of the thickness and the shape. I chose this one because of the thickness of the metal. And then this one is not particularly my style in terms of the finish, but I like the shape, and I like that it has a wide bar, so I can make a really wide belt. But what I will do is just purchase metal spray paint and paint it silver because I like the silver belt buckles. So you can do that. Go to your local thrift store and pick up some ugly belts and cut the belt off to keep the belt buckle. Now, you can also go into your closet and see if you have any belts that you no longer wear, and then you can just remove the belt and keep the belt buckle. So I have these 2. These are not old. I do like these, but I just wanted to show you that that's an option to just go shopping for belt buckles in your closet. Now, some of the tools that we're going to use when we're making the belt to make the buttonholes, or not the buttonholes, but the holes for the belt buckle, the prong of the belt buckle to go through, we're going to need several things. So I'm going to show you these 3 tools first that we'll use together, and then I'm going to show you a kit that I have. So first we're going to need to punch a hole in the belt, in the fabric. So you see the belt holes, we're going to need to punch a hole. So if you have a hole puncher, that will be very helpful. After we punch the hole, we need to determine if the hole is big enough for the eyelet. So here I have eyelets, and this is what we're going to use in our belt. Now you see these don't have eyelets. We're going to put eyelets in our belt, but this is what we're going to put inside of those holes. And after punching the hole, if it's not wide enough, if the hole isn't wide enough, then we're going to use our awl. And you see the awl the awl is skinny and then it gets wider and wider. So you get to just keep pushing it into your fabric, and I'll demonstrate this. You can push it into your fabric and turn it until you get the width that you want. And you can determine that by just pressing your eyelet or pushing your eyelet onto the awl. And then that'll just give you an idea of at least how far you need to go for starters. Okay, and then after you have opened up the hole, then this is, I'm not sure what it's called. I think it's an eyelet plier, an eyelet punch, but we're going to use this to set the eyelet into the hole that we've created. So those are 3 tools that you can use to open up or to create your holes in your button or in your belt. Now I want to show you this. Let me move some of these. This is a kit that I've had for many years. It's called a crocodile. I used to use it when I did card making, but it can also be used for fabric, for creating the holes and setting in the eyelets. And it's a workhorse. It's an amazing tool. So what it does is it has cutters. It has these hole punches on both sides. On this side, it has a 1/18 inch hole punch, and on this side, it has a 3/16 inch hole punch. So you determine which size hole you need, and then you just put your fabric inside, and then you press. And then here at the top, we have the prong on the left side, and then we have the base on the right side. And the beautiful thing about this is you have 2 different size prongs. You have that larger one, and then you push it out and then turn it. Let me pull it out with my other hand. And then you have the tiny prong. And then the same thing for the base. You have, I think, 4 different sizes. Or yeah, there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so you get to determine which size base you're going to use based on the eyelet, the size of the eyelet that you're going to be setting. So there is a link in my description box for this set. And I'll be linking to all of the other items that I've shown here also. Now we're going to talk about sewing machine needles. So you're going to need to choose your needle based on the thickness of the layers that you will be sewing together when making your belt. If you're choosing to sew to use your fashion fabric as your front and the backing, and you will be interfacing both layers. If you're using a lightweight fabric, you will be fine using a size 80-12. If you're using a medium weight fabric, you should also be okay with an 80-12. But if you're using a heavyweight fabric, I would suggest going up to a 90-14 needle. I'm going to be using a medium weight denim, and I'm going to be using a faux leather backing, and the denim will be interfaced, so that's a lot of thickness. So I will be using a size 90-14. So consider the thickness of the layers and choose your needle accordingly. And if you're not sure, then I suggest doing a test run by taking some scrap pieces of the fabrics, the layers, including the interfacing, put them together, sandwich them together, and then test the different size needles to see which works best. A few more items I want to share with you that I'll be using in the tutorial. First of all, Wonder Tape. I'll use the Wonder Tape to attach the belt, the fashion fabric, to the belt backing before we sew it together. It's going to anchor the pattern or the fashion fabric to the backing so that we don't have to use pins. If you're using a faux leather backing, you don't want to use pins because the pinholes won't go away once you insert the pins into that fabric. So I'm using Wonder Tape for that reason. If you don't have Wonder Tape, you can also use these little plastic clips. They're called Wonder Clips. I think that's a brand name, but these little plastic clips work really well to hold the layers of fabric together so that you're not inserting pins into your faux leather backing. Now, if you're using your fashion fabric as a backing or some other type of fabric that is okay with pins, you can use your pins to anchor your layers together. And then for opening the buttonholes, first of all, fray check. I'm using fray check to seal the threads in the fabric before cutting through so that after we cut the buttonhole open, we won't have to worry about fraying. And then the buttonhole opener set, I'll be using this, and it just makes it really easy to open up the buttonholes. Now, the only buttonhole we'll be inserting is for the belt buckle, or on the fashion fabric for the belt buckle. Now, if you don't want to insert a buttonhole for your buckle, you can also use one of your eyelets. I'm using a top stitching thread to attach my fashion fabric to the belt backing. It's a thicker thread and I'm using a contrasting color because I really want that to show through on the front side of the belt. And then to match the backing, I'm using a regular 100% polyester thread in the bobbin. First, we need to determine the length for the belt. So grab your tape measure and then decide where you want your belt to sit on your body. I'm making mine to wear with a dress, so I want it to sit right around this area. So grab your tape measure, wrap it around your body, wherever you want the belt to sit, and then take the edge of your tape measure and place it at the center front. Then take your measurement. My measurement is 29 inches, but we have to add extra length for the extension. Now, I don't like a lot of extra length on my belts, so I'm gonna stop about right here. You get to determine how long or short you want your belt. So take your measurement. Mine is 35 inches. This will be the finished length for the belt. We will be adding seam allowances to make the pattern. Now, if you will be wearing your belt under belt loops for a pair of pants or a skirt, next I'm going to show you how I take that measurement. To determine the length of your belt, if you plan to wear it under belt loops with a pair of pants or a skirt, you're going to put on the garment that you're going to be wearing, and then we're going to feed the tape measure through the belt loops. So I'm starting at the end with the largest number, so that's 60 inches on my tape measure, and then we're just going to feed it through the belt loops all the way around. And then we're going to pull it so that the edge of the belt is center front. Then we're going to take the measurement. My measurement is 31 inches. But again, we need to measure the extra length for the extension. So I'm going to continue feeding the tape measure through the belt loop. Now my last belt was 35 inches. That's too short for me to wear with pants. So I'm going to continue feeding through the next belt loop. I don't want it to stop short of the belt loop because I want the belt loop to hold that belt in place. So I'm going to continue feeding through that belt loop. And then I need a little extra overhang so that the belt stays in place. So I'm going to stop at 41 inches. So the finished measurement, the finished length for my belt, if I were making the belt to wear with these jeans, would be 41 inches. So I would make a pattern that's 41 inches in length plus the seam allowance. Before we start drawing our pattern, first I want to take a look again at the belt buckle to show you exactly how to measure that bar to determine the width of your belt. So this is my Sewology buckle and it's 1.5 inches. So we're going to confirm that and we're going to measure right across the bar with the seam gauge. So I'm going to measure from the front first, and we want to go from one end to the other just inside of the sides, the side edges of the buckle. So here, if you look, you will see that it measures 1 5/8 of an inch. But it's a 1.5 inch buckle. That means that the width of the belt that you're going to be making needs to be 1.5 inches, 1/8 of an inch shorter than the measurement of the bar so that it will fit inside nicely. Or I can measure from the back. Now you can see from the front, the bar is set down inside of the sides, but here on the back, the bar is raised. So we will just measure, making sure that we're measuring just inside of the side edges on the bar. And we have 1 5/8 of an inch. So this is a 1.5 inch buckle. But what if you are not buying a new buckle that tells you the size? If you are purchasing an old belt and using the buckle and you don't know what the measurement is, we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to measure from the front first, just inside of the side edges. And this one measures 2 3/8 of an inch. 1/8 shorter of that is 2 1/4. So this is a 2 1/4 inch belt buckle. So you will need to make sure that the width of your belt is 2 1/4 inches. If we measure from the back, it's the same. Okay, 2 3/8 of an inch. Now, if you are using a very thick fashion fabric and you're adding a faux leather backing or some type of thick upholstery backing, then I suggest making your width a little bit shorter. So this is a 2 1/4 inch belt buckle. I would go with maybe 2 1/8 inch, pressing it over at that measurement and then testing it on your belt buckle on the bar to see how it sits inside. And if it's too short, then you can always go and press it to 2 1/4 inch. But you just want to make sure that the width of your belt is not wider or rubbing too tightly against the side edges. To draw the pattern, you want to start off by anchoring your tracing paper down onto your table. And then we need to get a straight edge so that we can mark off our length measurement. And that's the measurement that we took in the beginning around our waist where we want the belt to sit on our body. So I have a straight edge here on my tracing paper. If your paper does not have a straight edge, then use your yardstick or whichever measuring ruler that you're going to use, and make sure that you draw a straight line longer than the measurement of your waist, where you're going to have the length measurement that you took in the beginning. So I'm going to use this straight edge on my paper, and my finished belt measurement is 35 inches. So I'm going to mark at the 35 inch mark here, and at the beginning of the ruler here. Now, I'm going to use my L square. If you don't have one, it's okay. You can just use your yardstick to measure over the width of your belt. Okay, I need to interrupt the tutorial at this point because I made a mistake and drafted the width of my belt 2.5 inches, but I'm using a 1.5 inch belt. I have no idea why I did that. Anyway, I just wanted to alert you because you're gonna see me measure over 2.5 inches. Keep going with the measurements that you have. We're gonna follow the same process, nothing changes. I'm gonna go back later and change the width of my belt to 1.5 inches. I just didn't want you to get confused when you see me measuring 2.5 inches for the belt buckle that I have, okay? Let's continue. So I'm using a 2.5 inch belt buckle. So I'm gonna measure over 2.5 inches. On the top, and I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and draw in our lines. Now keep in mind, this is just the finished belt measurement. We are going to be adding our seam allowance later, but first we're going to draw in the finished measurement line. Okay. And then you will go and draw your line at the top, making sure that you're marking a straight line. Okay, now we need to add our seam allowance. So I'm going to add 1/2 inch seam allowance, or I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance when I'm making my belt. So that means for the side seams, the long edges, I'm going to need to add 1 inch of allowance to my belt. And that's going to account for 1/2 inch on this side and 1/2 inch on the other side. Okay, so that's where we're going to start. I'm going to use my seam gauge and I'm going to measure out 1 inch on both ends. And then we're going to measure for the fold over extension, and then we're going to measure for the triangle or the point at the other end. So for the fold over extension, we're going to be adding 2.5 inches to one end. And on the other end, we're going to add the 1/2 inch seam allowance because that's what we're going to be sewing for our belt. Okay, now we're going to go and connect all of the lines. So this line will be the fold line for the belt. And then we need to create the point here on this end. So first we're going to measure down from the top 1 1/8 of an inch. And we need to do that on both sides. Now you're going to go cut out your belt, cut out the rectangle, and then we'll create the point at the other end. So what we want to do is we want to fold the top edge of our pattern in half so that we can establish the midpoint. Actually, let's just move these and fold it over. We're only folding the top. We don't need to fold down the entire length, just enough to establish the center point. Okay, then we'll open it back up and anchor it to the table. So this will be where our point starts, and we'll just draw our lines over to the side. I'm going to draw a little mark there. Now, before we move any further, there is one thing I did forget to do. I forgot to add the seam allowances on this end with the point. So we need to go back and do that. So I'm just going to take a scrap piece of paper and I'm going to tape that down. I'm going to measure up 1/2 inch. You can just mark right along that triangle. And now you can cut that out again. Now what we need to do is mark our grain line. And for this, you can fold your pattern piece in half. Okay, then we'll open it back out. And whether you want to use this side with the markings or the clean side, it's totally up to you. I'm going to use the clean side. The fold gives you a guideline to make sure that your line is straight. And then you're just going to draw a line. It doesn't have to go the full length of the pattern piece, just enough to help you know that you should align your belt pattern piece with the grain line parallel to the selvage. And if you'd like, you can label your pattern piece. I'm just going to call mine fabric belt. And I'm going to mark 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then we're going to go down and mark the fold line. If you can't see it from the other side, then you can use tracing paper and turn it over this way, place your tracing paper underneath, and just mark that. I can see that line through my paper. And we will label this fold line. And now we're ready to cut out our fabric. Okay, after you have cut out your fabric pieces, this is what you should have. You should have 1 piece of your fashion fabric, unless you're using it as a backing. If that's the case, you will have 2 pieces from your fashion fabric. 1 piece of interfacing, and again, if you're using your fashion fabric and you want to thicken your belt, you can cut 2 pieces of interfacing. And if you're using a faux leather or some type of upholstery fabric, you will have 1 piece of your backing. Now, we can set the fashion fabric and interfacing aside, and then you will need to measure off the seam allowances on both long ends and on the end with the point. We're going to cut that away, but you're going to leave the seam allowance on this straight end. So measure off 1/2 inch all the way around and then trim away your seam allowance. And then we'll get started pressing up our seams so that we can put the belt together. Okay, now I've cut down all of my pieces to the correct size for my 1.5 inch belt buckle. After you're done drafting your belt pattern, make sure that you go back and mark the belt width on your pattern piece. This is especially important if you're going to be drafting multiple belt patterns with different widths. That way, when you choose a belt buckle, having that measurement there will make it easy for you to just grab your pattern piece without having to measure the width every time. After you have cut out your fashion fabric piece and your interfacing, you want to go to your pressing station and you're going to fuse your interfacing to the wrong side of your fashion fabric. Now we're going to go to the pressing station and we're going to press up the fold on the edges. And remember, we added 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you're going to fold over 1/2 inch, the full length of your belt on both sides, and you're going to press. Now we're going to press up the raw edges near the point, and I'm folding over about 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to press. Then I'm going to use my clapper to make sure that I get a really nice crisp fold on that end. Then I'm going to fold in on the other raw edge to create the point. I'm going to press and use my clapper again to flatten that area. Okay, that's what we have. Now we're going to go down to the other end and we're going to fold over about 1/4 of an inch on that raw edge, and then I'm going to press that and use my clapper to get a nice crisp fold. If you're working with really thick fabrics and you have a clapper, this is very helpful. If you don't, it's okay. And then I'm folding over on the fold line, and again, I'm going to press and use my clapper to flatten it out. Okay, so this is what we have so far. Everything is nice and clean. Now we're gonna fit our belt into the belt buckle just to check. And I have extra room, so everything is good. My belt is fitting inside of my belt buckle. Now I'm gonna test to make sure that my belt is fitting my belt backing. And as you can see, my belt backing is wider than my belt. And that could be for one of two reasons. Either I folded my belt over too much or my belt backing was cut too wide. Okay, if you end up having to trim away some of your belt backing, then this is how I do it. I'm going to use my rotary cutter. If you don't have a rotary cutter, then you can just use a pen or some type of marker, position your fashion fabric over the backing, and then use a marking tool to draw the line that you need to trim away. And then you can use your scissors to trim away the excess. So I'm going to use my rotary cutter, making sure that the belt, the fashion fabric, is positioned centered on the belt backing with the points even along the edge. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm pressing down on the fashion fabric so that it doesn't move, and I'm just going to trim away. Moving my fingers down along the way, making sure that you don't cut into your fabric. So I've trimmed away on that side, and then I'm going to do the same thing on this side all the way down the entire length of the belt wherever it needs to be trimmed. Okay, now that we have our fashion fabric folded and pressed, we're going to mark a line here right where we have the fashion fabric folded. So just take a marking pen and draw that line. And what we're going to do is we're going to trim away this excess here. And I know when we drew the pattern, I said not to cut that off, but that's because I wanted to make sure that we have enough, because I wanted to leave the excess length so that you can cut off however much you need for your belt. So I'm just going to cut inside of that about maybe 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch. Let me turn it around. And then I'll measure off. I'm going to measure off 1/4 of an inch. And then I'll cut that off. Okay, we have one final step of preparation on the fashion fabric before we sew it onto the belt backing. So we're going to use the Wash Away Wonder Tape. And we're just going to take a strip, the length of the belt, and I'm stopping right there. I'm going to open out my fold and just stop right where the crease is. And then I'm just going to press the Wonder Tape right onto the fold. And I'm going to cut that away. So just make sure that you use your finger to press the Wonder Tape strip onto your fabric. Okay, and then we're just going to lift the backing and the adhesive. You should see the adhesive on the fabric. Okay, you're going to do the same thing on the other side. And before you go to your pressing station, make sure that you add a couple of strips right here along the edges where we created that point, because you want to make sure that this is pressed down onto the belt backing in this area. And this is what it should look like after you've applied all of your adhesive. Now we're going to take the fashion fabric and place it on top of the belt backing, making sure that the points are aligned. And then we're going to press and then you want to test to make sure that it's adhered, and then continue pressing down the entire length of the belt. And when we get down to the other end, you're going to press, avoiding pressing the fold flat. And once more, we're going to fold over and give that one more good press, and I'll use my clapper. Okay, if you don't have any Wonder Tape, then you can use these little plastic clips to hold your fabric layers together. I do not recommend using pins if you're using a faux leather backing, because the pins leave holes in that fabric and you can't get rid of that. So the Wonder clips work really well. So you'll just pin along the long edges on both sides. And I would just recommend staggering the pin or the clips along the length, and then you can remove them as you're sewing. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew the layers together. We're going to set our machine for a straight stitch, and then for my fabric, I'm going to set my length at 3.5. You will determine your length by the thickness of your fabric. And we're going to start on the end with the fold, and I'm sewing with the right side up, with the fashion fabric side up, and I'm going to start right here underneath the crease, underneath the fold, and we're going to just sew really close to the edge, a top stitch from the top all the way down. And then when you meet the first corner, you're going to stop with your needle down into the fabric, lift your presser foot, and then pivot. Then we're going to sew over to the next corner, same thing, pivot, sew over to the next corner, pivot, and then you will continue down the other side of the belt. And when you reach the other end where the fold is, you will back stitch there. Now, when you're done, if you notice that there is backing peeking out extending beyond your point on your fabric, then you can just clip that away as you see me doing here, making sure that you don't cut into your fashion fabric. Okay, now we need to sew a buttonhole for the prong of the buckle. We want to make sure that it is centered on the belt. So I'm gonna place my thumb there, and then I'm gonna take my tape measure, and I want about a 1/2 inch buttonhole for my belt. So I'm gonna measure 1/2 inch, making sure that the 1/4 inch mark is right along that fold. And then I've penciled in or marked my dot where I'm going to start the buttonhole, and then we need to make sure that we measure to see if that dot is centered. Mine is at the 3/4 mark, which is correct for my length, the width of my belt, which is 1.5 inches. Then we're going to insert a pin to see where that comes out on the other side. And as you can see, my pin went through the backing. I don't want that because I don't want my buttonhole, I don't want to sew my buttonhole on the backing. So what I'm going to do is just cut out a little curve shape to open that up. And I ended up cutting it twice after checking it the first time. So after you make that cutout, then push a pin through again just to make sure that you're not catching the belt backing. Then you will set your machine up for a buttonhole. Now, you want to make sure that you change your thread because you see what happened on my buttonhole. I forgot to change my thread. So change your thread so that you have a pretty buttonhole. Okay, after the fray check has dried onto the fabric, we're going to open the buttonhole. And I'm just going to take my blade and insert it right into the opening. Now my blade is longer than the buttonhole, so I'm going to be very careful that I'm not cutting into the threads. And I'm going to come from the other end. And then I'm going to go to the middle. And then there we have the opening, and that's enough for this prong to fit through. Okay. Now we're going to insert the fabric into the belt buckle. So I'm inserting, my prong is down that way, and I'm going to insert the belt here and push the prong right through the buttonhole, and then push the fabric through. And there, that's how we want it inserted. Now, we need to stitch down the fold onto the belt. And if you look, my belt buckle is right there at the edge. So I don't have enough clearance on my fold to sew this down, to top stitch this on my machine. So I'm going to hand stitch my fold down onto the fabric. Okay, so you can hand stitch using a thick needle because you're going to need to go through the layers, the multiple layers, and just go ahead and hand stitch right along the edges. I'm going to hand stitch right along this edge. If your belt buckle isn't as long as mine and you have clearance, then you can just go ahead and top stitch this right across the fold on the right side. And now for the final step. Before adding the eyelets to our belt, we need to try it on. So take your belt and wrap it around your waist. And then we're going to take the edge of the belt and we're going to just feed it through. making sure that it's placed on your body wherever you want to wear your belt. And then we're going to fit it, and we're going to identify where that bar is or where the prong is so you can feel with your finger. So this is going to be our current wearable position for the belt. And then you can take some type of marking tool. I'm going to use my chalk roller and just mark that position. Okay, then we're going to take that out. Now we're going to go and start planning out the spacing for the eyelets. Okay, before we add holes to the belt, I want to show you some samples of different belts to give you an idea of the number of holes and then the distance between the holes so that you can determine what you want to do for your belt. And remember, this is your belt. You're customizing it to your own desire. So you just do your own thing. So this is a purchase belt, and you can see here on the tab, it has 3 holes. And the distance between the holes from the center of one to the center of the next is 1 inch. Okay, so 3 holes, 1 inch apart, or 1 inch apart. For this belt, it has 7 holes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 holes, and the distance between from center to center is 1 inch also. Okay. For the next belt, we have 7 holes also, and the distance between the holes is a little more than 1 inch, so about 1 1/8 of an inch between the holes. And this is a belt that I made. It has 3 holes, and the distance between is about 1 1/4. Same thing with this belt that I made. The distance between is about 1 1/4. So I'm going to be making 3, maybe 4 holes in my belt, and I will make them 1 1/4 inch apart. So you decide the number of holes and how far apart you want them. Now we're going to determine where we want to position the holes for the belt. So I'm going to turn this. We're going to measure the width of the belt. Mine is 1 1/2 inches, and I'm measuring right where the first line is for the first hole. So it's 1 1/2 inches, and I want to insert or mark my hole halfway through. So that's my first marking. I'm going to measure over. Remember, I'm going to mark my holes 1 1/4 inch apart. So I'm going to measure over 1 1/4 inch. And that's right here, and make another hole. Okay, I'm going to make one going down this way. So 1 1/4 inch down here. Okay, so these are the markings where we're going to place our eyelets. So I'm going to show you 2 different ways that you can make your holes in the belt. First, I'm going to show you how you can use the crocodile kit. So you will take your tool, and then you need to determine which hole punch you want to use. I'm going to use the 3/16 side. Okay, so I'm going to start. Let me grab a eyelet. I'm going to use the silver eyelets to match my buckle. Okay, and I'm going to position the hole punch right on top of the marking. I'm going to turn it with the hole punch on the top. I'm going to push down to make sure I'm positioned correctly. Once I have that in the spot that I want it, I'm going to press down. And then there is my hole. Then we're going to insert our eyelet. So I'm going to turn the tab to the larger prong. Okay. And the same thing on the bottom, and it's already on the larger side. So I'm going to take my eyelet and I'm going to push it through the hole on the fabric. Okay. I'm pushing it through, and then I'm going to take my tool, the eyelet press, and I'm going to push that prong right through, and I'm going to squeeze it all the way down really tight. And my eyelet has been set in. Very, very easy, very simple, very clean. So that's one way you can do it. Now I'm going to show you, let me get another eyelet. I'll show you how you can do it with these tools. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to punch the hole. We're going to punch a hole. I'm going to start down here. Again, you want to position your hole punch directly over the fabric. Now, the issue I'm having right now is that this hole punch, the opening here is not wide enough for my belt. My belt is thicker. So I'm going to try to push this up to insert the hole punch, or to insert the fabric. So I'm going to pull this up and insert it. And it's still too tight, so it's not fitting. So if you have a hole punch that does not fit, and I'm so glad this happened so that I can demonstrate. If you have a hole punch that does not fit, that your fabric won't fit into, it's okay. We can use the awl. So we're going to take the awl and we're going to press it through in the position, twisting, making sure that you're not punching your finger, but I'm going to push through, twisting so that it punctures to the other side. So you can see as I'm twisting, it's going through to the other side. Okay? And I'm going to keep pushing and turning. I'm going to pull it out to see the opening. I'm going to test to see if the opening is large enough for the eyelet. And right now it's not. So I'm going to push that aside, and I'm going to push and twist more, pushing that eyelet, or pushing the awl deeper into the fabric so that the opening is getting wider. Okay, I'll pull it out, and then I'm going to test my eyelet again. And now it fits. And I'm going to push using my eyelet to open that up. I'm pushing the fabric down from covering the edges, the jagged edges of the eyelet. Okay, I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to use this tool, and I'm going to press down really tight, really tightly. And there I have my eyelet inserted, and then you can see it from the back. Now, you will notice that the back on this one is not as clean as the back on that one. So you will continue inserting your eyelets for the belt. Okay, at this point, your belt is done and you're ready to wear it. But I do want to add another optional step, and that's adding a tab to the belt like I did with these two. Now, on these two belts, I added a tab, but I didn't attach the tab. So you can see in the back, it's not attached to anything. And I did that to make it adjustable. I'm going to do the same thing with this belt, but I'm actually going to create a thread chain so that it will be adjustable, but it will stay attached. So if you would like to add a tab to your belt, this is what we're going to do. So cut a strip of your fashion fabric and a strip of the backing. And we're going to take the fashion fabric and we're going to wrap it around the backing. Now I'm placing the backing with the right side facing down just to fold it over and press it. So we're going to fold it over We're going to fold the fashion fabric over and we're going to press it from the back side. Then we're going to remove the backing and then we're going to press it down again just to get a nice crisp fold on the edges. And I'm going to use my clapper to make sure that it's nice and flat and sharp on the edges. And before we leave the pressing station, we want to take our backing and test it on the fabric to make sure that everything fits nicely. Okay, after we've pressed over our fashion fabric, we need to determine the length that we're going to cut our backing. So make sure that your belt is buckled, and we're going to wrap the backing around the belt. And I'm just going to place the edge right at the center and then wrap it around. I'm going to grab that and I want to slide it to make sure that it slides smoothly. And if it doesn't, then loosen it to make sure that it's sliding smoothly, because remember, we're going to add another layer of fabric on here. Okay, so after I have the length that I want, I'm going to find that edge and I'm going to clip it or cut it right there. Okay. So this is the length that we're going to use, or that I'm going to use for my belt. So edge to edge, I get a good amount of sliding. And if I wanted to, I could make that even smaller, but I'm going to add it to my fashion fabric and then wrap it around to see what I get. And I still get a good amount of sliding. So that's the length I'm going to use. So I'll set my belt aside. Then you're going to use the same steps that we used to attach the backing to the fashion fabric. I'm going to apply Wonder Tape and press that onto the backing, my belt backing, and then you will make sure that you fold that over and press it, okay? And then after you have pressed on the Wonder Tape, if you don't have the Wonder Tape, of course, you're going to use your plastic clips. Then you'll go to your sewing machine and you're just going to stitch from one end all the way to the other on both sides. Okay, we have our tab ready and we're going to wrap it around the belt for fitting, making sure that we get sliding, and just keep adjusting until you get the fit you want. And mine is about right there. So I'm going to mark that spot so that I'll know that's where I'm sewing it. Okay, just going to mark right there. Then you're just going to take your needle and thread and fold it over, making sure that you're covering the marking. And you're going to sew that down. You can sew it down on the side edges, and then you can do a little whip stitch across the top. You can go and do that on your own. Okay, after sewing my tab together, I went to the pressing station and just gave it a nice flat press. So we're going to insert it onto the belt. And then we need to determine where or how far down we want the tab to extend. So I'm going to close up the belt, and I'm going to put it at my current width, the size I am right now. Okay, now I'm going to insert the tab, and because I personally don't like a whole lot of overhang on my belt, the extra length, because it tends to stick out, and when I'm holding my arms flat, it just gets in the way for me. That's just me personally. So I would like for my tab to extend at least this far. I don't want mine up here because when I'm wearing my belt, I don't like that sticking out like that. So I'm gonna put mine about there. So that's about the spot where I want it to extend. So I'm gonna remove the belt, trying to keep my tab in place. And I'm just gonna add a clip. Okay, so I have my needle threaded, and I'm using top stitching thread, or you can use embroidery thread. So what I'm gonna do is turn it over, and I'm gonna start right here at the center, and I'm gonna go under the fold, and I'm gonna push my needle through. And I've already knotted the thread on the end, and I'm gonna sew through one more time just to secure that. Okay, now I'm not gonna pull it all the way through. This is where I'm gonna stop. Now this is the technique that I use to create a thread chain. So I'm gonna pull this fabric through, or the thread through, and continue pulling until it knots right at the edge. And then I'm gonna pull the thread through the loop again and pull it all the way until it hits the previous knot. And that's the technique. You just keep reaching through the loop, grabbing the strands of thread, and pull to tighten the chain. Okay, so you will continue, and we're going to keep creating the chain until we reach, or until it's long enough to reach our tab. Okay, so my chain is as long as I want it. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to open that loop up again, and I'm going to go through the loop with my needle, and I'm going to knot it off, and that's going to end the chain. Now I'm going to feed the chain through the center on the edge of my tab. And I'm going to feed it through a few times. And then I'm going to go through the top and come out on the bottom, on the back side. Then I'm going to knot the thread. And then I'm going to go in on the fold and feed through. Pulling through. And then I'm going to clip the thread. And now we have a tab that's adjustable. So if you close your buckle and put it on the very last hole, your loop extends to hold it in place. Okay? And then if you want to put it on the first or this hole closest to the edge, you will have the chain loose, and to prevent it from peeking out and showing, you can just tuck it underneath your tab while you're wearing your garment. Okay, now our belt is complete. Well, that's it for today. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial. If so, make sure you hit the like button down below. And if you'd like to be a member of my private email community so that you will receive advanced notification emails when new sew-alongs or tutorials are coming, so that you will be prepared when the video releases, then make sure you tap the link in the description box that says join my community. I send out links to all of the fabric, the patterns, and the tools and supplies that we will be using in the sew along. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.